Oh, it's so wonderful that we all are able to get together in this way. It's kind of an impossible gathering otherwise.
Absolutely.
Well,
Yes.
literally, just given the travel, I normally travel about 80% of my time, and this is so much lower overhead. You just walk down into the basement and connect. For me, it's been wonderful. I have more hours available now than I think I have had in a long time.
Well, that's good for the planet.
Yes, if you notice the beautiful blue skies. I mean, we've been taking a walk every day around the park, and except for the next couple of days here in the Washington area, it's going to be pouring down rain. But otherwise, it's been beautiful because nobody's pumping out carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide and all that other crap from the cars.
Well,
I was going to say this is an impossible gathering because trying to get on Vint's calendar, it's so you sort of have to be 2 years out or something like that. I remember when I first met you, Vint, I was literally like, have you ever come to Woolly Mammoth? Will you come to a show? And you're like, well, I'm actually booked for 362 days of the 365 days in a year, but maybe next year you can come. And I was like, hooray, I'm going to be on this Zoom with you and spend some time.
You know, here's to impossible gatherings. And I think that we're probably live now with a short delay on Facebook. So with an almost blue sky in Washington, D.C., here, UK, DC, Virginia, we're really glad to welcome everyone to the celebration of Shakespeare's birthday. And we're here with you virtually from our own homes. And it is a day where we are sheltering in place, but we decided we would also create in place, because those two things can go together. I just wanted to introduce some of our guests. We've got three really wonderful people to talk to today. And really the title for the panel came when I knew who was going to be on this panel. What is it that fabulously creative people think about Shakespeare and why do they like him? The three people we're talking to today, first, I'll introduce Maria Manuela Goyanes, who since 2018 has been the artistic director of Woolly Mammoth. She came to Washington from the Public Theater in New York City, where she was director of producing and artistic planning. She was involved in productions of Hamilton, of Fun Home, The Tempest, Winter's Tale, Twelfth Night, and brings to the conversation just a wealth of both present and past awareness of what theater can do. So welcome, Maria. Thank you for joining us. Our second guest today is the RSC director, Iqbal Khan. He's speaking to us from the UK. Iqbal Khan is known for, among other things, a groundbreaking production of Othello, in which he cast a black actor, Lucian Masmadi, as Iago. He is also the feature of a Shakespeare Unlimited podcast, which is just a terrific conversation, Iqbal, and it's great to have you online here again. Thank you for joining us too. Our last guest is Vint Cerf. Vint is a visionary technologist. He is the creator with Robert Kahn of the Internet TCP IP protocol, which is the packet switching algorithm that allows the internet to scale and not break. And Vint, if you didn't do such a good job, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation. So really glad, and we thank you for that. He's also a member of the Folger Shakespeare board. He is always thinking about the future, and he's grounded in the past as well. I will note that as part of his computer science dissertation at Stanford, he quoted Chaucer. So we'll love to see that convergence of science, technology, poetry, the arts, and history. This is really a great group. Thank you all for joining us. So we'll talk for about 25 minutes. And then we will have some questions from people who are online. So I thought I would start with each of you, Maria first, but the question we thought we would just kick off with is, you know, we know that Shakespeare was one of these fabulously creative people, and he was living through a time of incredible change, whether it was the media revolution of the printing press, the culture wars of the Protestant Reformation, or this emergence of this amazing new entertainment medium called professional theater, in a world that was really discovering how wide it was and both how wonderful and how cruel people could be as they looked out over the horizon of the new modern world. So what is it that Shakespeare can tell us, or what is it that is Shakespearean about this time of disruption? And how do you think that creativity is one of the ways in which we can kind of cope in place as we shelter in place? Maria, please, to start with you.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm a little bit starstruck by the group of people that I'm with on this Zoom, and I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. So I'm going to go quickly because I'm really just thrilled to be part of the conversation. Thank you, Michael, for asking me. You know, this is hearkening back to my life working on Free Shakespeare in the Park, and often every year we would do something or discuss and or create work around Shakespeare's birthday and or sort of making sure that his poetry and his plays were still speaking to the people in the 21st century in the time that we're making it, and so I worked on lots of different adaptations of Shakespeare as well as very faithful renditions of it, etc. And the thing that I keep thinking about is this moment is sort of like forcing transformation, right? This is like forcing some experimentation to happen. And I think that when I think about the plays in particular, and particularly the plays where folks have to go into hiding, have to change their outward appearance to be able to actually like survive in a difficult moment, to actually, that so many of Shakespeare's characters and so much of what those plays are about is this kind of sort of forced transformation and forced experimentation that has to happen. And I imagine that was a major theme that was occurring at that time because you just had to be nimble, you had to be adaptive, you had to be flexible. And I feel like that is something that I think about creativity and artists. Artists are, to be honest, right, like the most innovative beings on the planet, right? That is like, and most of us, I mean, for me in particular, thinking about myself with my dramaturg hat or a director hat or whatever, I'm often just like running after what it is that the artists are putting into the world, the pathways that they're creating, the new routes, and to try and actually explain and or talk about what they're doing, and sort of try and contextualize them, in terms of what has happened from Shakespeare to now and even before. I mean, frankly, I think of this time as pretty biblical, and Lord knows Shakespeare was all about those references. So there's something about that, the fact that he was also writing and thinking about of himself in that continuum, right? And sort of understanding plagues and epidemics and various things like that, but also how the resiliency of people and the resiliency of those characters when faced with those forced transformations that feels like a very big part of what artists are having to do and handle right now. And and so that's what I've been thinking about a lot.
I think that's wonderful. And we should hold on to that idea of forced transformation in biblical times, or whatever sacred text you want to call upon to talk about what we're living through. But forced transformation, it seems like something that he was so interested in. And it's what we're living through right now as well. Thank you so much. Let's now add Vint into the conversation. Vint, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mike, and hello, everybody. I'm by no means a Shakespeare scholar. Others here are so much more deeply engaged, but I will say that in response to Mike's question, that the thing that attracts me the most to reading the Shakespeare plays is the vocabulary. And what's remarkable about this, of course, is that it's basically 17th century vocabulary, or even late 16th century vocabulary, which is not always understandable, which makes it so intriguing. If you've ever seen the coffee cups that come from the Folger that have Shakespeare's insults on them, I mean, they are, talk about creativity. I mean, they are remarkable. I mean, how do you even come up with some of the similes that he manages to evoke? So vocabulary is a big deal from my point of view. Mike has done a couple of things using computers in conjunction with Shakespeare to show how if you elide from a document the things that Shakespeare introduced into the English language, the documents look like Swiss cheese. We have ingested Shakespearean language in many different ways that most people don't even realize. So that's one thing. The second thing is that I've learned that there are things that Shakespeare writes about that are, for me, reminders of humility. And so there's a character in Twelfth Night whose name is Malvolio. And Malvolio is sort of starstruck with his, his outfits. And everybody knows I wear three-piece suits. And I like that. I mean, I actually find this, comforting. I'm down in my basement right now, but I get dressed to go to work. I'm not dressed just because of this. I get dressed to go to work, even if it's down in the basement. But, remember Malvolio and his cross-gartered, and people were, he was a fop. And so I have to remind myself that not to be overly foppish when it comes to dress. And so that's another little thing that Shakespeare is teaching me. The third thing, which I think is probably the most telling about Shakespeare's plays, is that it is about people and their motivations and their incentives and what is driving the action. And it has not changed in 400 years, maybe it hasn't changed in 4,000 years, but the fact that we still read Shakespeare and we still get such richness from it is partly because he is describing characters and their motivations, which we recognize in the 21st century, as well as he recognized in the 17th. So I think that, for me anyway, it is the characters that count. Last point, just happened to have watched Shakespeare Uncovered, which is a series that the Folger was involved in, among others. And the thing that was most interesting to me about it is that we were hearing from the actors what they went through as they tried to play, put on the role, assume the role that they were playing, and the struggle that they had to get themselves into the moment and understand what Shakespeare was trying to get them to articulate was fascinating for me. And I thought it was the most interesting perspective, although Iqbal, I would be interested to know how you would see the difference between the actor's point of view and the director's point of view, because I suspect those are not necessarily always exactly the same.
I think Iqbal, you got a direct question, so I'll just turn it to you and note that Vint has now said that we're all actors preparing for a part.
Well, I do feel like an actor unprepared for this part, but I'm absolutely delighted to meet you, Vint and Maria, virtually. It seems to me, I mean, again, this is one of the wonderful improvisations that we have to, the creative actions, gestures that we're engaged in to try and find a way to make some interesting statement, some insightful reflection at times of disruption. I mean, it's very interesting, Michael, you talking about the context for these plays, the Elizabethan world. It seems to me when I read about it, it seems like a very difficult time of people besieged, cruelty in the air, besieged not just by events, politicians and world events in that sense, but by natural events, plagues, and to be making work, to be making creative gestures at that time seems to me to be an extraordinarily heroic thing to be doing. And what's particular about the way Shakespeare does it, it seems to me, is that he hardly ever writes about the now. He always does it through metaphor, through allegory. The stories are often set in some historical context, so he's not directly critiquing the Queen or various figures as Ben Jonson would do. And the great thing about that is that he is able to live beyond his time because of that. He is able to tap into exactly what Vint was talking about, the kind of the things that make up human societies and make us human, the things that fracture us as society, as a society and as individuals, and those sorts of truths survive and are always relevant. I was just thinking about your forced transformation insight as well, Maria. That seems like a very interesting thing, because he's always putting his characters in situations where what they were isn't sufficient for the times, that they have to rediscover, find a new way to be. And that, again, seems to me something that we're all engaged in now, not just in terms of understanding ourselves and what we have been, but understanding our responsibilities to others, and how we, what is our responsibility now? Is it to, as creative artists, is it to entertain? Is it to bring a bit of light into people's worlds? Or is it to do the opposite? Is it to provoke? Is it to be skeptical about those that judge us and make decisions for us, and to challenge the systems of governance? And it seems to me that all of those things are things that Shakespeare is constantly engaged in. He's the great skeptical dramatist. None of his happy endings are happy endings. They're all slightly skeptical. Everyone is changed. The world has changed. There's the possibility for positive change, but it's only a possibility. And that has always intrigued me, both as a director and as a performer, to create those open experiences where the audience are left with some responsibility to reflect on how an experience is useful to them. Is that okay as a beginning, Michael?
So great. Now we're in the deep end.
Yeah.
As we were preparing for today's conversation, I was thinking to myself, I do turn to Shakespeare for solace and inspiration, but if you look at what he says about what human beings do to each other, it's not really a pretty picture. He had technicolor vision for the ways in which, Hobbes said that man is a wolf to other men, but that there's a predatory aspect to human life, and he didn't blink. And so in that way, he's a realist. And I think, being a realist is what makes you a successful primate. Our species had to get here somehow, and our realism may have helped, and our risk aversion, but it's still, and I think Shakespeare gets this too, it's still our dreams and aspiration that make us feel more like humans. And it's those moments. And what I love about Shakespeare is his ability to have this binocular vision. He can see all of the pain and corruption. But then he also says, our hopes, our wishes for the happy ending will in some sense make us free. And that I believe there's a kind of a democracy of perception that is possible. We're unequal in what we bring to the theater and the resources we have in our lives, but there are certain moments in those plays where I feel the whole room is leveled, and at least we can just see what people are. And that's the beginning of taking action, of creating, a better life in association with, okay, I will stop. But you hit a topic that is really powerful, and Vint, go right ahead.
I'm sorry, that was not intended to say stop. It was simply intended to say, can I get in the queue? Good God. Every instance of the staging of a Shakespeare play is a moment of great creativity, because the physical facilities are varied. And so you're challenged repeatedly. Shakespeare himself was challenged to do the histories because, you can't stage all of France in the middle of the war and all this other stuff. And so he has to evoke that in people's imagination, and he invites that. So talk about creativity. The thing that I was thinking about in terms of times of stress like we are in right now, or if you go back to the Great Depression, one of the things that people sought was entertainment. It was escape. It was, please take me out of the world I'm in. And I think Shakespeare recognized that was an important element of the theater. And so what we are doing now, literally, this is an example of attempting to take the constraints that we're in. We can't be in the same building together and within 6 feet of each other, and to take advantage of technology in order to replace that which we wouldn't have done otherwise. And it has interesting characteristics to it, because there are people participating in this event who are watching the event who probably could not have physically gotten together at this moment anyway. And so suddenly we've enabled things with the technology. It's not the same. It's not quite the same feeling. It's not like you're 2 feet away and having this wonderful discussion. So we're now exploring in this forced way that Maria points out, new technologies for engaging in the things that the theater and Shakespeare's plays induce us to want to do.
I love the fact that we're also waiting for each other to intrude. I was just thinking about that. I was thinking about the spaces that Shakespeare created. Again, that audience was all the world, as it were. It was the illiterate to the aristocratic. It's extraordinary that he conceived of these plays not to be read, but to be shared in a space like that for everyone. And therefore, everyone is inscribed in those plays, that vision. And it's very interesting, Vint, that you're talking about how he also enables, even within a scene, like, say, the murder of Duncan in Macbeth, he allows, as this cataclysmic, apocalyptic event is about to happen, and is happening off stage, as it were, or has just happened, he then introduces a stand-up comedian, the porter, who basically starts to improvise jokes around, struggling to keep his liquor in and urinating and all the rest of it. And then we go straight back to the dark again. And it's easy, to use Maria's brilliant word, he's extraordinarily agile and nimble in moving between the experiences and the registers for all that audience, and challenges us to be the same, I think.
I think that's such a great point, and the agility is something that we still marvel at. I just noticed some questions coming up in the queue that go merge kind of right in here. But one of them is what Shakespeare plays. So given what you've said about this writer and how he speaks to the times, what play would you want to stage or see at the far end of this crisis? And Maria, I'd love to start with you, if you would.
Oh my goodness.
You can have some time to think about it too.
Yeah, the thing is, I'm going to go big. I want to see the whole thing. I want to see the 36 plays. I want to see someone actually take them on and actually sort of, reinvest, reinvigorate, and rethink this for a post-pandemic world. That's what I would like to see. There's some of the plays that I've never seen. I've worked on Four Lears, I've worked on One King John, I've worked on some other plays and stuff. But one of the things that I am always marveling at is how his craft changes over the course of those plays, and how he as a dramatist also changes over the course of that life. I guess I'm interested in sort of like stepping back and sort of, I love everything that everybody's saying into these particular moments, and I have my own moments. I mean, I'm partial to As You Like It. I'm partial to Measure. I'm partial to, there's some other plays that, Lear, that I have memorized and that I think about. But the thing that really is so fascinating to me about Shakespeare is the breadth and the scope over the course of that time and that career, and him, sort of understanding and learning how to write, how that changes over time, how the letter, how the device of a letter moves through the plays, or how the device of, again, women mostly taking on men's clothing moves through the plays, and things like that make me really excited to think about those sort of bigger themes. I think of it, it is a biblical moment for us now. And so I'm a little bit like go big or go home.
I love what you're saying. And just since we're all on this thread, the Folger has this wonderful book called the First Folio. It has 36 Shakespeare plays in it. And when we reopen, we'll have a gallery that's filled with all 82 copies. But I just want to say to you, to the artists who are on this thread, that I hope we can all commit to performing these 36 plays in a new key. And I look forward, I hope, to collaborating with you in figuring out how we go big on this, Maria, because I think you're absolutely right. I think that book is kind of the diary of humankind, and we just got to reread it. And to do it, we should stage it. Anyways, I'm so grateful for what you've said. Iqbal, if you are ready, if you could go next.
Okay, I will try. I completely agree with Maria and you. I think having all of them out there, having the chance to look at them again in this context is extraordinary. But I do think about, as Maria was suggesting, that how his voice developed and how many different kinds of Shakespeares there are. And I think about things like Titus Andronicus, which is almost a satire on the cruelty of nations and peoples to each other, to something like Lear, which is Beckettian, and it's not nihilistic. There's extraordinary compassion in it, but it's very different to something like Titus Andronicus. And then in the middle of that, there's this beautiful, delicate story, Romeo and Juliet, which is all about the experience of these two young people, whose fate, as it were, is controlled by decisions that adults make around them, and they make terrible decisions for them. The friar makes a terrible plan to try and solve the problems between these two warring clans. He decides to marry them the day after they've met, and with all the consequences that result from that. It feels to me like it's a real opportunity to think about the way decisions are made and what investment people have in those decisions. And Shakespeare's constantly dealing with that. And what will our new futures, our new horizons look like? The other thing I'd say, beyond doing the plays, and I also think about The Tempest, by the way, which is this wonderful man who's, in a sense, living in forced isolation with his daughter. And he creates a world. He creates a world, he finds his muses, and he creates a world that has its own beauty and magic, but also has its own oppression. And then at the end of it has to leave it, as it were. The lockdown is relaxed and he's welcomed back into the world, but we mourn what he's lost at the end of it. And that feels to me a peculiarly pertinent play now. So anyway, so those are some thoughts about individual plays, but I also think about how we share them now, and the opportunity to really use people like Vint's imagination and creativity to help us find ways to make the experience of these sorts of conversations more active, more dynamic, that the experience of audiences when they're participating in the events isn't so passive. How can we include them more? How can we make their presence, how can it influence the performances? Sorry, go on.
No, I think that's great. And we're going to lose Vint in about 5 minutes, but so yes, The Tempest. Let's all think about returning to the world with The Tempest. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And Vint, as a technologist, you have, I'm sorry. Vint, as a technologist, you've been active in all of this, and I just want you to think aloud a little bit about, you've actually thought a lot about people with hearing disabilities who have to connect in the theater, and you've worked to make sure that our patrons at the Folger have a chance to hear or read what is happening on stage. But you're thinking about the future of connectivity and how we interact. What would you like to see when we emerge out of this?
So first of all, with regard to which play, I've been upstaged. I would have said The Tempest, and the reason I would have said it and will say it now is that it is a story of redemption, and I consider that to be one of the more positive of Shakespeare's plays. And when you remember the fall of the Soviet Union, the fall of the Berlin Wall, what did they play? They played Ode to Joy, Beethoven's Ninth. And that's exactly the kind of feeling I hope we all end up having, is this great feeling of salvation after we get through a pretty serious pandemic. On the technology side, several things are happening in the online world. One of them is an increased ability to do real-time captioning of these kinds of discussions. In the Google equivalent of Zoom, we have real-time captioning, which is done with machine learning, and it's actually quite good. And I'm hoping to see that technology show up in everything, so that all of these kinds of online interactions are assisted in that way. But the more interesting question will be, how do we make use of all the computing power which is invoked when we have these kinds of online discussions? Remember that we've got huge capability to generate imagery and to generate sound and to do all kinds of other things to create virtual realities that are not being introduced in this simple kind of conferencing environment. And so what you begin to, we can present slides and things of that sort, but it's sort of not terribly dynamic. I'm just beginning to believe that as we now are forced into this online environment, that the computing power that's available and the essentially unlimited potential of what computers can do in terms of imagery and sound might actually open up a whole new variety of in the medium. And imagine, what the creative artists will do with that horsepower to entertain us and to explore ways in which they can get their ideas across. So for the writers and the actors and the directors, this forced movement into the online world may actually turn out to trigger an entirely new medium. It will be really interesting to watch this all happen.
Someone asked online what the motto for the 2020 the post-pandemic world should be, and I'm going to apply to your last soliloquy, Vint, Brave New World, which
yes,
you actually walked into with the TCP/IP protocol, and the word brave there actually means also striking and kind of bracing. Like you have to hold up in this new world. So that'll be my motto phrase. But let me turn this one back. If you have to go, it's been great to have you here.
No, thanks. I do need to jump back onto my other conference call, but thanks for having me on the show. Thanks for letting me participate, and thank you all for what you do for all the rest of us. Bye-bye.
Great to meet you, Vint. Bye-bye.
Well, we're still a quorum. there's still plenty of ideas on the channel, but a lot has been thrown out here, and I love the idea of re-emerging and re-engaging. What is it that you think you will be able to do or not do after there's a vaccine as artists? What is it? What is your creativity going to lead you to, or what will it lead you away from?
Shall I start, Maria? Yeah. I don't know is the answer, and I'm unafraid to be in that place. I think that's a peculiar part of what it is to be a creative person. Is you sort of live in disruption all the time, and you constantly pick up the pieces again, and you're excited about how they might reconfigure. Vint said something very interesting there at the end about the Tempest being about forgiveness, redemption. It's also about forgiveness, isn't it? About how can I connect again with a world that has isolated me, that has enacted such cruelty upon me. We all have that ability in us, and I love constantly, whenever I'm engaging in a new process, starting again. And I feel like that's where we are. We're obviously armed with the things that have inspired us, the things that we have learned, etc. But I think that there should be a joy about how we can reassemble, reconnect, rediscover everything. I mean, that is ultimately the definition of what it is to be radical. And I'm very excited. I mean, obviously, I'm nervous practically. I'm nervous about whether I'll have the opportunities that I had, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that. And I think I'm relatively lucky in terms of my position in the industry. But I think we all have a nervousness about how much will our reach be enabled? Will we have the freedom to, or the space to discover and to put things together again in the right way. But I think we have to not be defensive about our next steps. I think we have to walk with confidence and with courage into this new future. But I don't know what it's going to look like. I imagine the first steps are going to be about what allows us to get a significant number of people together in a room. How can we physically connect with each other again, and start from those building blocks? I mean, we're connecting now virtually, but we are connecting. But there's something very significant and human about the paralinguistic stuff, about the stuff that goes beyond language, about our corporeal physical presence.
Explain that paralinguistic word.
Well, it's all the stuff that we do when we communicate with each other that is beyond the words that we use. It's the sounds that we make. It's our physical language. It's our physical presence, how we share space with each other. And you know, I think maybe 80% of what we do with each other, what we communicate to each other, is that actually. And I think we're gonna, you know, it'll be interesting to see how we get back in touch with each other in that way. And I imagine it'll be graded. I hope there'll be an extraordinary appetite from communities to get together again, to share spaces again, and to hear stories and to be delighted and maybe angry together again. You know.
Yeah. Well, if 80% of our connection with each other face to face is about just reassuring each other that we want to be here, and I hear you and you hear me, it maybe the big message of live theater is I want to be here with you. And I can't see living without that. I hope we have that opportunity to experience that. Maria and I look forward to visiting you in your playing space. And I look forward to having you both in our space, but please, let's just continue along this line of being together. Maria, if you would.
Yeah, you know, the thing I keep thinking about is I really do believe something is lost right now in our society. It's just very similar to what you're talking about, Iqbal, is that it, you know, that language that, you know, that is communicated between us, that is, cannot be communicated right now, you know, and even just on top of that, just the sort of idea of, you know, we were talking about Shakespeare and, you know, having the queen in the, you know, in the box and then everyone else, the groundlings on the floor, you know, the fact is there is something about, unfortunately, rubbing elbows with folks that really does make the experience different. Partly because also the liveness of it, right? The fact that it does, you know, as much as you rehearse, as much as, you know, you can direct something within an inch of its life, the fact of the matter is that there is a kind of like you are tossing the ball in the air and sort of allowing, you know, allowing the room and the space for the audience to actually be a part of what it is that you're doing. And what's hard about this particular medium is it's not easy to actually allow that kind of organic transfer of energy to actually happen. So there is something that feels like, even though we are connecting, it does still feel pretty one-sided in some way. You know, not the least of which is because we can see ourselves. And so there's a self-consciousness that comes from most of these interactions of like, oh my God, I look tired today, you know, or whatever it is.
I imagine actors deal with this all the time because you're taking a look at yourself as you're performing. And now the whole world has to do that as we Zoom each other.
Oh, totally, totally. And so I think I love everything that you said, Iqbal, and the conversation about how necessary it is for us to actually feel that connection, and that's part of our that I feel hopeful about it. And as much as you say that, you know, there's skepticism, etc., in Shakespeare and stuff, I do see so much hope in those plays, and I do, yeah, and I do see so much of like even just thinking about the Tempest, like how much does Prospero have to put down of the grief and the difficulty that he's holding, what he's carrying through the world to be able to reemerge, and how much of that is going to be actually true for so many folks. I mean, again, I feel like to be very privileged and blessed. Like I have a job, I have not been furloughed, I have, you know. And that's not the case for a lot of the artists who I work with, right? So there is a, as you said, you used the word brave. There is going to be a bravery that is necessary to step back onto the stage and into a world where it is, you know, it was already somewhat, you know, unstable, right? By virtue of the fact that, like, disruption, as you said, and art go hand in hand, and your life and, you know, making a career doesn't necessarily, it's not always, you know, linear.
No. Okay, can I just come back briefly on that? Which is, it seems to me that in the last few weeks, as we've isolated and as we've had to keep our 2 meters or 6 feet apart from each other, I'm constantly encountering people, and there's an ache for them to say hello, even though they do it from a distance. There is this ache to suddenly be with or to connect with real people, because we're sort of, with the increasing kind of development of media and Netflix and TV and all the rest of it, we've sort of been isolating anyway, and there has been a challenge to the live experience, and actually we've sort of accelerated that process. It's been forced on us that this is what life might look like, say, without the experiences that we provide. And it seems to me what you're losing here is the stuff that makes our experiences so electric, which is the erotic, the Dionysian connection. And I mean erotic in the broadest possible sense. Obviously, you're not just about seducing someone, but the physical presence of someone. I mean, we know that the great experiences that we've had in theaters, in communities, is not just to do with the glorious things people are saying, but there's something about the sounds of people's voices, their presences of great artists, and how they can change the molecules in a room. And you never forget the way it makes you feel when you're sharing the space. I mean, and this applies to music, this applies to engaging in any kind of live exchange. It's what I found when I've been in a room with people that have excited me. It's not just the quality of their insights, it's the quality of their presence.
Yeah, the chemistry shifts. Yeah. The chemistry completely shifts in a room when that happens, for sure. And this is actually one of the reasons why it's like the uniqueness of those individuals and that gathering of individuals. I mean, frankly, most of those rooms will never actually have the same group of individuals in the same place at the same time ever again. There is an absolute uniqueness to that moment. And this is why, I mean, when I think about Shakespeare in particular, like, oh, what I wouldn't give to go back and be a fly in the wall in that room.
It's such, and Shakespeare makes so many references to, you know, great events in small rooms, or he refers to the globe as if it's Hamlet's mind, but he's also looking out at that stage. And everything you're saying reinforces for me the fact that even though the COVID pandemic, what it does is it makes us not want to be together physically, there's some profound way in which we are grieving about the fact that we do want to be together. And that is part of being a human being and a primate and being social or spiritual. You do want that feeling of just being there with the molecules dancing because, hey, it's us and it's now and it's only us and only now, which is what, you know, makes my heart beat faster when I'm in a really, really great performance. But I wonder, and Iqbal, maybe you might have thoughts on this as not a kind of your UK perspective, but Americans, I think, have a genetic desire to somehow be together. And then they've got a lot of things that make it really, really hard to be together. And whether that's conflict, it could be a bunch of things, race, it could be economics. Anyways, there's a straining to just be in the same damn boat all the time.
Mm.
And I think one of the reasons why Americans have gravitated towards Shakespeare is that he does remind us that on some very deep level, we really do want to be with each other. We want to live in association with one another. I mean, how do you work that out? That requires a lot of smart, responsible, creative people, not just legislators. But I wonder if the audiences that you direct for and the actors you work with, are they connecting with that same kind of underlying theme of, hey, let's all be in the room together? And what does that speak to in terms of aspirations for another liberal democracy, which is the United Kingdom?
Yeah, I don't think there's an enormous amount of difference in terms of the satelliting of people over the last, I don't know, 10 years. We've had our Brexit, you've had your challenges, and that on the one hand, there is this sense of people feeling, like I said earlier on, besieged, people being intimidated and afraid, and therefore wanting to bind or find their tribe, because it consoles them, and therefore they want to spend time with and listen to and read people that consolidate their views or articulate their fear. That's okay. I get that. I really do understand that to me is an incredibly human impulse. The great thing though about great works of art and the sorts of activities that we're engaged in is that you're engaged in the opposite experience, which is you're engaged with people whose worldview and whose stories are often diametrically opposed to yours. And we're not forcing everyone to agree with each other. And what you discover, if you do that with compassion and gently and carefully, what you discover is there's a great joy in encountering difference. It doesn't have to destroy the things that make you who you are. What it can do is it can enrich how you define yourself and the sort of world that you live in. There's nothing to be afraid of is the simple answer, but it needs to be managed carefully. And I think that's where people like us, I hope, are charged to guide those sorts of encounters, because the greatest joy, the greatest strength comes from negotiating those differences. Because if we construct our world as a satellite, then we will fracture. The cosmos will keep expanding and will keep distancing from each other. That project is doomed to failure. There is no possible hope to that project. It's a succession of failures So it seems to me that the rooms that I have charge of, the conversations that I'm often involved in, are to do with finding a way to help people listen to each other and see each other, and to take great joy in being surprised by the fact that people are different and have different ways of finding joy and constructing societies. And for me, none of that should be something that makes us afraid. When we shut that down, that for me is the thing that I want to resist in my life, and I think we should be trying to resist in the world.
Amen. Can I just say, I loved everything that you said. It ennobles us to reach for new understanding, right? And if we could, if there was a way that, I believe in the sort of what we've been talking about the humanity and how similar it is, and how we can feel the grief and the mourning and or the forgiveness and the redemption, those feelings. But sometimes I often feel like the conversation is only about that and not about how different people experiences are, and not allowing room for that to be at the table at the same time, right? Who was it? I think it was F. Scott Fitzgerald who said something about, the mark of intelligence is to be able to actually hold two opposing views at the same time, or something like that. I think that contradiction, and again, this is through all of Shakespeare, but that contradiction actually is what it means to be human, is finding those moments that tether ourselves to each other, but then also allowing us to have a breadth and difference of experience to share with one another too, right? And this is the thing that I thought you were going to go to, Michael, with the conversation about the United States versus the UK, was more about also how extroverted as a culture we are. And the fact of the matter is, this pandemic is making a lot of people go a little cuckoo because of how extroverted, a lot of our culture is here in the United States.
Certain national cultures are already practicing social distancing as just part of the way they create intimacy, because when you're further apart, then the moments when you do connect are so much more vivid and powerful. Someone just texted in another question, which was, how will the humanities change? Because there's a little dance where, for the high school students who are listening to this, well, what the heck is the humanities? It's languages, philosophy, history, and the art forms that inspire them. But it's about reflecting on all that and asking, what difference does it make? And it's very worthwhile. But I think that we are at a moment where, someone said to me, the COVID-19 pandemic is the end of the 20th century, in the same way that the First World War was the end of the 19th. And that means that institutions and trends that were underway the last 100 years have now just been accelerated, and we really are walking through a new door. And I do think that's why your thoughts on creativity are so kind of interesting and directly important right now, because we will have to create. And then on the side of the humanities, those of us who, speak from my background, who study words and study works of art and history and try to understand them, I do think that is going to change. I think there might be a shift from an emphasis on what we now call criticism, which is assessing the form and seeing, what is the real argument of this piece of art, and what does it get right and what does it get wrong. I feel like the next 20 years of humanities work may also be about recovery. So how do we recover things like the experiences of people in the past who maybe couldn't tell their story? Or how do we recover a sense of that aliveness and togetherness? Because that's hard work too. And a lot of the skills that you learn in a seminar in a high school English class or history class or in college, they can help you with that too. But I do think our wagons are hitched. Now I'll say that I'm different from the two of you, because I am not a creative artist, but it's what gives me sustenance and gives me something to think about, and also something to feel about. But I think, the next 20 years may be more about how we feel and what we're able to see than they are about what we're able to know, because we've produced a lot of knowledge.
Yeah, there's something in the public health sector that when they talk about sort of buckets or themes and how something moves through a population, I wrote it down because I was just so fascinated by it, and it speaks to exactly what you're talking about, Michael, is this question about sort of first resilience of that community and that population, right? Communication, right? Which is one of the things that we're all working on right now and trying to figure out, making sure that, I would add the word transparency in that in some way, shape, or form, but let's just call it communication. The next bucket is connection. And then the final bucket is recovery. So it's just, to me, it's also thinking through sort of like, it's not necessarily phases that are linear in that. They can, move between each other, etc. But I wonder what recovery looks like. And I wonder how we move through sort of understanding our resilience. I wonder about, in terms of communication, this is the part where the humanities comes in, because that's really what it is trying to actually just talk about what it is that is happening, right? And try and sort of help us understand it and make meaning of it. To this question of connection, how we are connecting in that paralinguistic way, right? And not, and then what does a recovered population actually look like?
I'm sorry, such great words. And all you high school students who are out there listening to this, we've gotten up into some of the higher, the higher registers of vocabulary, but go look up paralinguistic. Really, really, really important. Go for it, Iqbal.
So I was just going to say I feel very tethered to you, Michael, and to you, Maria. But I feel, I mean, I was also, when I was starting out, I was a scientist. I was what they used to call a natural philosopher. And I think they're all connected in terms of the future of the humanities. The biggest word for me in terms of, quote, recovery is innovation. I think if there's one thing that we know now is that we're not innovating quickly enough. We need people doing pure science. We need people doing pure philosophy. We need people thinking about thinking about playing, thinking about connecting, rather than ends orientated. All those horrible words, the idea of an outcome. We're always
results oriented.
Exactly, resources are always targeted at outcomes. Measured responses, and you kind of go, actually what we need to be resilient, brilliant word, is to be nimble, innovative, and there's a great, for me, there's a massive need to be able to talk across specialities, and it seems to me that where you learn all those skills is at the time when you're in further education, when yes, you're doing a degree, yes, you're working to pass exams, but you're also around people who are all engaged in their own specialities, they're all engaged in their own journeys, and you should be having those open-ended conversations, challenged, learning about learning, getting excited about people who are different to you, and it seems to me all of that stuff is the stuff that is going to make our society more resilient, more innovative, and be able to respond to terrible things like this. And let's face it, there is a bigger problem in terms of, what we're doing to our planet. There's a more profound pandemic happening, as it were, that we have created, that we are creating, that we are continuing to create, and these conversations are parceled off and fragmented, and they shouldn't be. They're all a part of the same thing, which is the responsibility of the many to the few, the responsibility of those that have to those that might have. All of these things are very, very important, it seems to me.
It's so great to have two really perceptive, kind of wide-ranging artists on the line, because you just gave the soliloquy, the kind of Agincourt speech for, I would love a scientist who's incredibly goal-oriented to come up with a vaccine. So I love that. But you're both saying something, and this is why Shakespeare still speaks to me right now, is there's just something astonishing about creativity and that restlessness that I even just get reading a line of Shakespeare. You can sense he just wants to move on to the next thing because he is moving. But I think, it's 11:59 and we're going to have to close this out. But first, thanks to you both. This was really, I'm sitting here in my basement listening to the traffic, but I'm listening to you two, and it feels like I've been out for a really great evening. And I hope those who are listening feel the same way, Maria and Iqbal. And I also want to thank Ben Lauer, who is our web producer, and I'm learning this word, our ZM, our Zoom master. Ben, thank you for Zoom mastering. And please, any sign off from you, Maria or Iqbal, but thank you very much, and happy birthday, Shakespeare.
Happy birthday, Shakespeare. That's all. So happy to be here.
Indeed, happy birthday, Shakespeare, and such a delight to meet you, Maria, and Vint when he was there. Ben, I've been looking at your icon, but I saw you briefly earlier on. And Michael, thank you so much for making this happen. Thank you again.
Grateful to all of you, and folks at home, it's a tough one, but you can do things that you didn't think you can do. And the arts and great poetry and history are sustaining things, and they will sustain us. Look forward to seeing all of you in person on the other side.